He was born a peasant in the frozen desolation of Pokrovskoye, a remote Siberian village buried beneath snowdrifts in silence so deep it seemed to swallow sound itself. In that bleak and brutal landscape where wolves often outnumbered men and where winters stretched endlessly, time moved with the slow ache of suffering. His name was Grigori Yefimovich Rasputin, a name that, in time, would echo through palace halls and whisper like a curse in the corridors of power, becoming synonymous with dark mysticism, political decay, and spiritual chaos. From his earliest days there was something unsettling about him, his gaze too intense for a child, his silences too deep, his moments of speech often filled with strange murmurs and prophecies that frightened the elders. While other boys played in the snow, Rasputin stared at the sky, lost in trances. The villagers spoke of him in hushed tones, calling him a starets, a wandering holy man, while clutching their crosses and keeping their children away. His aura carried both divine fire and demonic chill. As he grew, Rasputin abandoned the trappings of family life, his wife and children left behind like shed skin as he wandered barefoot across Russia, seeking monasteries, visions, and holy answers. He claimed to see saints in the forest, to feel God's hand guide him through the void, and people began to talk, first in whispers, then in awe. By the time he reached the great city of St. Petersburg, his name had traveled ahead of him like storm clouds before thunder. The capital, glittering with chandeliers, velvet-lined halls, and royal excess, was ripe for a man like Rasputin. Russia under Tsar Nicholas II was a nation on the brink, peasants starving, revolution simmering, generals scheming, and the royal family increasingly isolated and out of touch. Into this fragile ecosystem entered Rasputin not through traditional power, but through desperation. Tsarina Alexandra, desperate to save her only son, Alexei, who suffered from the incurable and terrifying illness of hemophilia, turned to the man whose name had reached her through the whispers of noblewomen. The child had nearly died several times, and the best doctors in Europe had failed. Rasputin arrived, not with medicine, but with prayer, gaze, and ritual. That night, Alexia's bleeding stopped. Coincidence or miracle, it did not matter to Alexandra. Rasputin had her soul. She came to believe he was sent by God, and thus began his infiltration not of the palace walls, but of the hearts that ruled it. Soon Rasputin's word carried the weight of imperial decree. He advised the Tsarina on ministers' strategy, even theology. His influence grew like ibislo at first, then all-consuming, yet what nestled beside Alexandra's spiritual need was Rasputin's darker craving. He indulged in nightly drinking binges, his hands roamed freely among courtiers and servants alike, and his appetite for lust and liquor became legendary. Tales of wild parties, whispered invitations to candlelit orgies, and abusive manipulation surfaced in every corner of Russian society. Priests condemned him, nobles feared him, ministers hated him. But to Alexandra he remained our friend. She destroyed careers for his protection. She exiled those who spoke against him. Rasputin, the illiterate peasant with dirt still beneath his nails, had become the most powerful voice in Russia, and the empire already cracking began to rot from within. Those who tried to fight him found themselves humiliated, exiled, or simply gone. He seemed indestructible. When a mad woman plunged a dagger into his stomach in broad daylight, he survived. When investigators uncovered affairs, bribes, threats, and more, the evidence vanished or was suppressed. His enemies began to speak of him not as a man, but as a force, something supernatural, untouchable. Witnesses claimed he could freeze you with a stare, make grown men sob with a whisper, or bless a child with a glance. Some claimed he had the power to possess minds, others, that he was the Antichrist hiding in holy robes. Either way, he had burrowed into Russia's soul like a parasite, and the more the country suffered economically, socially, politically, the tighter his grip became. He seemed to thrive on chaos. There were rumors Rasputin had developed his own theology, one that fused sin and salvation. He preached that only by sinning could one truly be forgiven, that only through depravity could purity be found. He surrounded himself with followers who saw him as a messianic figure, urging them to drink, dance, and indulge, for every indulgence brought them closer to divine grace. To the religious establishment, this was blasphemy. But Rasputin was unfazed. He claimed the rules of the church did not apply to him, for he had been chosen by God. His ego grew monstrous. At times he claimed he could see into the future of Russia, foretelling doom, disaster, and blood. He prophesied his own death repeatedly, warning that his murder would signal the end of the Romanovs. But what made it all the more terrifying was that many believed him. Even his enemies feared the consequences of killing him. Superstition ran through the aristocracy like a fever, and no one dared act until they did. And then, the night came. December 1916. The aristocracy had had enough. A secret plot was formed by some of Russia's wealthiest and most desperate nobles, including Prince Felix Yusupov and Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich. Rasputin was invited to a late-night gathering at the Yusupov Palace under the pretense of wine. An entertainment. The room was prepared with cakes and wine laced heavily with cyanide. Rasputin ate. He drank, and nothing happened. Hours passed. The poison seemed to have no effect. Panic swept the room. Prince Yusupov, driven by terror, pulled out a revolver and shot Rasputin in the chest. He collapsed. They celebrated. But as they turned to leave the room, a gasp echoed behind them. Rasputin stood again, bleeding, breathing, raging. He lunged at his attackers like a wounded animal. Another bullet struck his head. Still, he lived. They beat him savagely, bound his hands and feet, and dragged his body across the snow to a hole in the frozen Neva River. They dropped him into the icy blackness. When his corpse was discovered days later, the autopsy revealed water in his lungs. He had drowned, poisoned, shot, bludgeoned, and frozen, yet still alive long enough to fight his fate. Even in death, Rasputin cast a shadow. His murderers were never the same, haunted by nightmares, some descending into madness, others dying young and violently. The Empress was inconsolable, writing to the Tsar that their holy protector had been stolen. But Rasputin's death had not saved Russia. In fact, it may have sealed its doom. Within months, the Romanov dynasty collapsed in revolution. Nicholas and Alexandra were imprisoned and later executed with their children in a basement. The empire that once ruled 1/6 of the earth vanished into blood and smoke, and Rasputin had warned of it. In a final letter to the Tsar, he had written, "If I am killed by common men, you will survive. But if it is your nobles who kill me, not one of your family will remain alive." The prophecy came true in horrifying detail. And so, Rasputin became more than a ghost. He became a myth, a riddle etched in blood and fire. To some, a devil in disguise, to others a misunderstood mystic. But all agree on one truth: he was not just a man, he was a storm in human form, and wherever his shadow fell, history was changed forever. Today, Rasputin's legacy continues to provoke fear, fascination, and furious debate. His name appears in books, films, songs, even political discourse. Historians argue endlessly over whether he was a fraud or a miracle worker, a pervert or a prophet, a tool of destiny or an agent of ruin. Some claim the rumors were exaggerated by his enemies, that his only true crime was his proximity to power. Others say the rumors didn't go far enough, that even now the full scope of his manipulation remains buried beneath royal secrets and burnt archives. Pilgrims still visit his birthplace, laying flowers on soil that once knew his bare feet. His relics, bones, locks of hair, even alleged remains of his preserved genitalia have become curiosities, objects of both reverence and ridicule. Museums argue over who has the true Rasputin artifact. Occultists study his writings, and yet, despite a century of scrutiny, he remains an enigma, a wound in history that never closed. What lingers about Rasputin is not just the story of what he did, but the question of how he made so many believe. In a nation teetering on the edge, he filled a void, not with policy or weapons, but with presence. He was chaos wrapped in robes, comfort and threat in the same breath. Russia did not simply fall, it unraveled from the inside, seduced by a man who seemed to promise salvation but delivered destruction. In Rasputin, we glimpse a terrifying truth, that sometimes the downfall of empires comes not from enemies abroad, but from blind faith in monsters who wear the face of hope. His story is not just one of scandal and prophecy. It's a reflection of the human condition, our longing for miracles, our fear of fate, and our vulnerability when faced with those who promise to banish both. Rasputin is not merely a historical figure, he is a mirror, and the question he leaves behind still echoes, cold and hollow as the Siberian wind that once bore his cries. What would we believe if we were desperate enough to need it?